Climate change is pretty obvious. I think scientific resolution all around the world has pretty much said that there's a consensus that we are pretty much headed for a catastrophe in the next 20 years or so.
If we keep building the way we are and we're not replenishing our natural resources, of course we are.
Well, those worries of environmental catastrophe are themes in the Mad Adam trilogy of Margaret Atwood's new work. It is flying off bookshelves around the world, and Margaret rejoins us. Every person we asked on the street expects there to be an environmental catastrophe in their lifetime. What do you make of that?
Well, I would quote William Gibson, who said, "The future is already here, but it is unevenly distributed."
Well,
but I would also refer you to Bill McKibben, who's got 350.org, among other things, and his book called Earth, E-A-A-R-T-H. In other words, not quite the Earth we know. And that rearranged Earth that he was writing about 4 years ago is already with us. So the predictions that he was making, more severe storms, more severe flooding events, more extreme weather, that's already happening. I don't think you're going to see an environmental catastrophe that's across the board, you know, everyone blown down all at once. Not only is the future unevenly distributed, but it's lumpy. So it's here, it's there, but you don't know. You're never going to know what's going to happen because what we're seeing is a destabilization. We're seeing an unpredictability.
You have captured that in this novel we're looking at, The Year of the Flood, a waterless flood. But any Christian reader of this book will recognize readily the biblical theme of creation, fall, redemption.
And flood in the middle.
And flood in the middle. part of the God's journey to redemption was this flood. Do you think this planet is going to need a creator, a divine creator, to save it?
Well, that depends how you interpret that. Working through whom, for instance? Working through, for instance, you. Do I think a great big hand is going to come down out of the sky? No, and neither do you.
No, but I do think a great big hand is going to shape lives like yours and mine to unplug the toaster when I leave, or whatever it is.
Let us hope that maybe you unplug the toaster. Yeah, you can get timers for that.
Okay, but the idea that we're going to be prompted into loving our neighbor through our love of God.
Okay, unless we understand that our neighbor is part of the biosphere, loving your neighbor just as a kind of the traditional neighbor person, like a human being with clothes on in a house, that's actually not going to help your neighbor if your neighbor stops breathing because there is no oxygen. Do you see what I mean? You're going to have to see your neighbor as connected to the biosphere that encircles the planet to really love your neighbor.
Okay, you write about God's gardeners. We referred to it last segment. I want to introduce you to some real-life God's gardeners. They're going to come on set with us later, but we have from British Columbia, Leah and Mark Cucostomo from Arosha. Leah, you've got a question here for Mark.
I do. One of my favorite parts of the book, The Year of the Flood, was the saint days, when Adam 1 would introduce the saint day, and I thought it was fascinating, the saints like E.O. Wilson and Diane Fossey, so you have these scientists who are saints. And then I found it particularly fascinating towards the end, the last saint day, which maybe this is a bit of a spoiler, sorry for that, is St. Julian of Norwich, of course, who lived during the Black Plague. And I was just wondering if you could speak to that and your choice of these scientists' feast days and then this Christian saint at the end.
Yes, there is an intermix throughout the book. For instance, St. Francis is obviously going to be in there. You could not leave him out. And various other well-known figures and figures from other religions. For instance, the Buddha is in there, a noteworthy preacher about kinship with other beings. If you look in the Quran, you will also see some pretty friendly words towards other beings. So everybody in, and from every continent, from as many periods of history as I could find, And from science, yes, some of them, and naturalists, but also religious people who did what they did because they had an inclusive vision. And no more inclusive vision is available than Julian of Norwich, who had a vision way back in the times in which she lived. She actually had a vision of the planet itself as held in a giant hand, you know, carefully being held, almost like an egg. So that's why I chose her, and she has a little speech about loving kindness, and I concluded the book with that.
So do you actually believe, Margaret, that there is the loving hand of the Creator God caring for the animals, plants, and humans of this planet?
I think it's a question of what sort of story you want to endorse, as it were. If it helps you to believe that, I'm all for it. If it helps people to understand that they're part of a larger world than just them, I think that's great. And we're going to get to your thing about religion. Is it good? Is it bad? It is a human thing, and therefore it can have good and bad aspects, like every other human thing that we do. So religion can be a comfort and a help. It can be a reaching out. It can be an inclusiveness. It can inspire people to do things that they would never otherwise do. Or it can be a hammer to wonk people over the head with.
So it's a human construct. You don't really think there is a divine God?
That doesn't matter. You can say, we're like the radio receiver. You know, there's a broadcaster. How are you tuning your radio?
Okay, well, we're going to ask you a little bit more about this, but let's take it over to Sheldon now with a question for Margaret.
Thank you so much, Lorna. And my question is for you at home. It's very simple. Which do you consider to be more at risk, our water or our air? Take a sip, a deep breath, and please get back in touch with me, whether it's by phone, Facebook, or Twitter. Can't wait to read it.
Leah and Marco Costomo of Arosha will join Margaret and I next.